I caught my wife cheating with my son's best friend, and then karma took care of them. I've been married for 23 years to what I've always seen as my ideal partner. She's incredibly beautiful, smart and outgoing, with a kind heart. I'm 57 and she's 55. While our personalities differ, they complement each other. I'm more introverted, rational, and somewhat intellectual, while she's extroverted, intuitive, and empathetic. We share many interests and love doing the same things. We've traveled extensively and have 3 children, 2 girls and 1 unexpected but cherished boy, who's now 15. Our oldest is 20, a sophomore in college about 150 miles from home. We've been fortunate and enjoy the perk of going on extended vacations as a family every 5 months or so, often exploring new places, especially islands and beachfront destinations. We're all in good shape, and our children bring us a lot of joy. Sometimes we even invite family and friends, covering their flight and accommodation costs. Life has been great. I was married before, for 4 years, but it wasn't a good match. I was young, immature, and emotionally dependent back then. Looking back, I suspect my ex-wife might have had a personality disorder, and our later years together were a nightmare. She asked for a divorce, for reasons I couldn't understand at the time. Now I realize she had an emotional or physical affair. I was clueless then, reacted poorly, and was devastated initially, but eventually, I reached a breaking point and just wanted the pain to stop. The divorce was quick but bitter due to financial disputes. I was relieved when it was over and have no regrets about it. Career-wise, I had a successful run, holding senior positions for a global company at a young age. However, due to a rare disease causing hearing loss, I had to leave my career. Financially, we're stable, living off my savings and investments. I've saved and invested wisely over the years. I have the freedom to work on my investments, but I do miss collaborating with others and leading a professional team to build something bigger. In my career, I thought our marriage was fine. I guess we moved from young love to a more mature and stable relationship. We have help so we can go out together whenever we want, both as a couple and as a family. My hearing loss has been tough on us. It's frustrating because I can't join many group conversations anymore. I miss it, and I've become more introverted. Working alone doesn't help either. Dealing with my hearing loss has made me seem distant at times, which frustrates both my wife and me. She has to repeat things to me, and I can get annoyed more easily. It's frustrating when my strong cognitive abilities are hindered by not being able to hear or participate in group conversations. I've spent weeks or even months feeling like a bystander. I have a shorter temper and less patience in conversation because I often miss things. In long discussions, I like to get to the point to hear everything. I'm sure this can make me seem abrupt. So, why am I here? I started suspecting something about 3 months ago, and it has been bothering me since then. I was hasty and anxious, so I didn't wait for more evidence before confronting my wife. This suspicion has grown like a virus, going from a quiet doubt to a loud question. Is my wife gaslighting me about her affair? I have this persistent feeling that my wife is attracted to my son's 21-year-old best friend. It all started around 3 months before August 2019. We were preparing for a vacation with our 3 children, and my son was back home from school. It was a trip we had planned a few months earlier. Usually my wife takes charge of planning our vacation destinations because she loves traveling, and I enjoy seeing her excitement build up in the weeks leading to our trips. We've always had an active social life, mainly with a specific group of friends, most of whom we both know, and nearly all of them are married. My wife often goes out for dinner with her married friends once or twice a week, either at a restaurant or someone's house. She tends to fill her schedule to the brim and has difficulty turning down invitations. Typically, we coordinate our plans with family and friends early on. So it struck me as odd when I overheard my wife on the phone in the kitchen, not coordinating schedules but actively convincing someone to join us on a trip. I couldn't hear very well, but it sounded like she was saying things like, "It will be so much fun, just like last time. We can go on a boat ride, walk on the beach, snorkel, and more." It was almost like she was trying to persuade a child with candy. When she realized I was behind her, she got startled, almost dropping the phone. She clutched her chest as if I had given her a heart attack and then quickly pretended like nothing had happened. I gave her a puzzled look, wondering what had just occurred. She walked into the pantry, then returned to the kitchen, seemingly to compose herself. She asked me what I wanted for dinner, a question she had already asked a few hours earlier, which struck me as odd. I repeated my dinner choice, then left the kitchen to join my kids in the living room, where we were watching TV. A few minutes later, I was sitting at the dining table with my wife and kids, having dinner and discussing school, friends, and other topics. That's when my wife mentioned that my son's friend, let's call him Jason, had texted her, expressing interest in joining us on our upcoming vacation. This immediately caught my son's attention, and he clarified that he hadn't told Jason about our vacation because he intended to invite his girlfriend. However, my son mentioned that Jason had also texted him a few minutes ago, expressing his desire to join us on the trip. My son wanted to check with us before responding to his friend, but appreciated my wife bringing it up earlier. My son had informed us that he planned to bring his girlfriend on the trip, so it seemed a bit odd to invite his friend since he would likely be spending most of his time with his new girlfriend. Additionally, I had a suspicion that my wife was not being truthful about the text message because I now believe that Jason might have been the person she was speaking with on the phone, trying to persuade him to join our vacation, yet she was acting as if Jason had initiated the idea. Jason is a good kid, and he became best friends with my son when they were both 14 years old after meeting at a summer camp. Both of his parents are African American and live in a middle-class neighborhood in the inner city. They are hardworking individuals, both employed in a delivery service job. I won't specify to protect their identity. Although my son and Jason attend different schools, Jason's parents invested a lot of money to enroll him in various after-school programs that my son was part of. They also played basketball together, and Jason frequently visited our home to play video games with my son. I had met his mom a couple of times when she dropped him off at our house or picked him up from practice. My wife often volunteered to give him rides and had a fondness for him. This didn't strike me as unusual because Jason was a well-behaved and intelligent young man with a promising future. He graduated from high school before my son and attended a different college, so we hadn't seen him much since then. Given all this background information, I initially thought my wife might have lied to bring Jason closer to us again, as she has a tendency to get involved in helping underprivileged kids, mentoring minorities, participating in progressive activities, and volunteering. I believed this was another one of her efforts. Additionally, I liked Jason because he was remarkably mature for his age and could engage in adult conversations even better than my son. He was good company, so with all these factors in mind, I dismissed my suspicions. 3 days before our vacation, my wife and our 18-year-old daughter went shopping to get some items for the trip. It was a lengthy shopping trip, and they bought things not only for my son, but also some gifts for Jason. Even if I had known about this beforehand, I wouldn't have found it too unusual, because she had a history of buying presents for him when he was younger. The next day, my son's girlfriend arrived in the morning, and later in the evening, Jason also joined us. That evening was a lot of fun. We all went out to eat, with my wife sitting close to me and Jason sitting next to my daughter. However, I couldn't help but notice that my wife kept glancing at Jason throughout our time at the restaurant. Even when I was talking to her, she seemed to be in an exceptionally good mood, which puzzled me at the time. I went along with it because seeing everyone happy made me happy. When we got back home that night, I went to bed, and my wife stayed up late with the kids. I'm not entirely sure, but I think she eventually came to bed around 3 a.m. The next day, as we were getting ready for our trip, I was going through my checklist to ensure I didn't forget anything. I realized that my credit card was missing. After we had packed our bags for the trip, I searched everywhere but couldn't find it. While I was looking through my wife's luggage, because she had used it last, I noticed she had bought one of those revealing open-back bow crotchless bikinis. I found it inappropriate, especially for a mother her age. However, I thought she had bought it as a surprise for me during the trip. The following day, we all took a business-class flight to our vacation destination, which was in the southwest region of Barbados, specifically Carlisle Bay. It was a spectacular and luxurious Caribbean beach and spa resort situated on the southern shore of the island of Antigua. With its stunning white sand beach and tranquil turquoise waters, it truly felt like paradise and was one of the most beautiful resorts in Antigua. On the first day of our vacation, I spent most of my time relaxing on the beach, reading investment articles in the Wall Street Journal. Meanwhile, my family went scuba diving. In the evening, my wife, my son, his girlfriend, and Jason went to a disco bar. I opted to go to a restaurant with my daughter. When my wife and the others returned home about 3 hours after my daughter and me, I noticed my wife was a bit tipsy. She woke me up for intimacy, and it was one of the best experiences we'd had in months. I assumed something had really turned her on during her night out. The following day, I spent most of my time on the beach with my wife. In the evening, she told me she was going to a restaurant with my daughter's son, his girlfriend, and Jason. However, around 10 a.m., when my son returned with his girlfriend and his sister, my wife and Jason were nowhere to be found. I asked them where my wife was, and they said she went out with Jason on a local wildlife tour. That same night, around 1 a.m., I woke up and my wife wasn't beside me. I wanted to enjoy the ocean breeze and wait for her return. As soon as I opened the door leading to the living room, I noticed some quick movement around the couch. The TV was on, and I saw my wife pretending to be lying down on one of the couches, while Jason was on the adjacent one. My wife was wearing a revealing wrap-knot cover-up skirt, and underneath it I remembered the color of the open-back bow crotchless bikini I saw in her luggage. They were both sitting separately but looking awkwardly at the television. Even though the windows were open, the room felt heavy, and I could smell the unmistakable scent of intimacy. My hearing may be deteriorating, but my other senses were highly sensitive at that moment. I suspected Jason had been close with my wife. If I had opened the door more slowly, I believe I would have caught them in the act. I didn't know how to react at that moment. I glanced at both of them for a second, and it was an incredibly awkward situation. They clearly separated as soon as they heard the door open. Jason was only wearing shorts, no shirt, which wasn't too unusual given our suite's proximity to the ocean, but I could clearly see he was trying to hide in hardwood. I returned to the bedroom, and my wife followed me, feigning normalcy. I could sense that there had been closeness, and it seemed like she was trying to convince me that everything was ordinary, like they had simply been watching TV. That night, I didn't bring up anything because I was left without words. I felt an overwhelming sense of self-pity, depression, and loneliness. The combination of my hearing loss and the betrayal made me feel like I was slowly vanishing, as if my wife and family were beginning to overlook me. I was deeply humiliated and filled with shame. I had a restless night, and by the next day I knew I had no concrete evidence. Still, everything, from the moment I overheard her on the phone persuading Jason to join us on vacation to the almost incriminating situation I nearly walked in on, seemed to align. At that point, I strongly suspected my wife was engaged in a physical relationship with my son's friend. I lacked clear evidence, only having circumstantial clues, but it bothered me so much that I felt compelled to confront my wife. That morning, I called her into the room and admitted that I had caught her being close with Jason. I urged her to be honest and asked how long this had been happening. Her reaction was entirely unlike her and very peculiar. She vehemently denied everything and was deeply upset that I would even consider such a thing. She resorted to name-calling, even going so far as to call me deaf and a jerk. Her tactics worked, and she won the argument. I had no evidence, and there was nothing I could do because I lacked solid proof. She even insisted that I wasn't just losing my hearing, but also my sanity. She was resolute and persuasive, raising her voice to the point where I feared my kids might hear her. The thought of my kids discovering my unfounded jealousy toward the young man they had known for over 7 years, thinking he was being close with their mom, would be a disastrous and embarrassing situation. By the end of it all, I found myself in a difficult spot, the one who had to apologize. I felt I should have been more patient, gathered more evidence before confronting her. My emotions got the best of me, even though I'm typically a logical and rational person. I should have taken some time to think things through because I knew she would deny it. The remainder of our vacation was dreadful. My wife treated me with disdain, almost like I was a nuisance. I felt like I had lost some of her respect. However, deep down, I knew what I felt was real. I was convinced she was gaslighting me, and I believed she was being close with Jason on the couch, but I just couldn't prove it. Update: 2 days ago, I confronted my wife about my suspicion that she was having an affair with Jason. As expected, she vehemently denied it. Since then, she's been giving me the silent treatment, and even our kids have noticed, but we've kept it to ourselves. I've also noticed that she stopped spending time alone with Jason and has started doing activities with all of us present. This vacation was supposed to be about me, her, and our 3 children coming together, not driving us apart. Our previous vacations were filled with togetherness, fishing trips, picnics, and more. I couldn't understand why she was so insistent on inviting him this time. It's not like Jason hasn't joined us on vacations before. In fact, when he was 19, we went on a vacation with him. If I recall correctly, I spent most of my time with my wife, but I'm not a night person, so I would go to bed early. On the other hand, she's a night owl, so if there was any affair back then, it would have happened when I was asleep. I can't shake the feeling that this affair has been going on for quite some time. I suspect she took more risks this time because she hasn't seen Jason as often since he's been busy with college. Looking back, I question her frequent late-night dinners with married friends, which happen at least once or twice a week. Interestingly, these gatherings occur more frequently when Jason is on break from college. Our closeness has always been healthy, but I've noticed her libido increasing with age while mine slows down. We still have private moments once a week, and if it were up to her, it might even be more frequent. I can't help but wonder if my reduced intimate activity played a role in all of this. We only have 2 days left before our vacation comes to an end. It seems like everyone is having a good time except for my wife and me. There's this tension between us that I want to resolve tonight. I want to hit the reset button and go back to how things were before I confronted her. I don't want this tension to linger for another day, and I certainly don't want to carry it back home. So I pulled my wife aside and suggested that we have dinner at a secluded restaurant to talk things out, and she agreed. Later in the evening, while the kids were occupied with other activities, I put on a floral shirt and she wore a sundress. The restaurant was about 300 yards away from our resort, so we decided to walk there. We had previously reserved a table facing the ocean, which was a beautiful sight. We sat at a table for two, and I remained silent for a moment, hoping she would start the conversation. I felt like I made a mistake the first time by revealing what I knew too quickly. This time, I planned to make her feel comfortable, apologize for falsely accusing her, and let her do more of the talking. I intended to pay close attention, waiting for her to slip up. Over the years, I've trusted her completely and given her my all. However, she has betrayed that trust by disrespecting me, engaging in an affair with a man much younger than her son, and lying about it. She tried to guilt and shame me as if I were a fool. I'm the one who brought this family together, and I've worked hard to create the wealth she enjoys. Even the dress she's wearing belongs to me. She seems to think I've reached this point by being naive. I have to admit that I've been consumed by work, and my hearing loss may have distracted me. It's a harsh realization that I put too much trust in my wife and didn't pay enough attention to what she was doing. It's bad enough that she's having an affair, but when it involves my son's friend, someone she was supposed to be mentoring, it hits very close to home. After an awkward silence, my wife was the first to speak. She apologized for not spending as much time with me during this vacation as we usually do. She acknowledged that my suspicions about her and Jason had arisen because of their close friendship. She looked directly into my eyes and stated, "I never slept with him." I simply nodded in response. No words were spoken. She continued, expressing her understanding that I've been distant lately, partly due to my hearing loss and her efforts to reconnect with me. She also apologized for the hurtful things she had said earlier, explaining that anger had led her to speak out of turn. She assured me of her loyalty and commitment to our relationship. Her opening words seemed positive, and I hoped this conversation would lead to a more open and honest dialogue. In turn, I admitted that I hadn't been myself recently and expressed a desire for us to grow closer during the vacation. I carefully avoided mentioning Jason or the affair. We enjoyed a lovely romantic lunch together and returned to the resort holding hands. The remainder of our stay was uneventful, with my wife making efforts to spend time with me. However, it still felt forced, as though she didn't really want to be there. Perhaps it was my mind playing tricks on me, now that I was aware of the affair, and the image of my once pure and loyal wife had been shattered. I felt like I had been blind, but now I could see. After our reconciliation during dinner, the kids no longer suspected anything was amiss. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something didn't add up. That's when I remembered I had installed cameras in our house, covering common areas like the front porch, backyard, both sides of the house, living room, home theater, and game room. The cameras stored footage for 30 days before erasing it. I hoped they might have captured something incriminating that would prove I wasn't losing my mind. I was eager to return home with this potential evidence. I pretended that everything was fine for the rest of our stay. To my wife, it probably felt like a close call. She likely believed I had forgotten all about it, thinking she had successfully manipulated my perception. She acted like the perfect mother and wife, but I couldn't help feeling disgusted because I believed she was comfortable deceiving me. It gave me the impression that she may have engaged in such behavior throughout our relationship. Throughout my life, even in business, honesty and loyalty have been paramount to me. And being lied to or feeling deceived is something I detest. Upon returning from our trip, I was filled with excitement. I didn't want to get my hopes up about finding anything on the cameras because my wife was well aware of their presence. She had actually encouraged me to install them after seeing them at her friend's house. I didn't think she would be careless enough to engage in any suspicious activity within the camera's view. However, I held on to the possibility that she might have slipped up this time. Paranoia consumed me. Because she knew I was on to her, I worried she might rush home to erase the recordings before I had a chance to review them. My wife isn't particularly tech-savvy, so wiping the memory was beyond her capabilities. Still, she might attempt something to compromise the camera's storage and make it impossible for me to retrieve any information. After we disembarked from the plane, I informed my wife that I wasn't feeling well. I acted convincingly sick and asked her to pick up a prescription for me. She usually handles my prescriptions, and even though I was certain I didn't need a refill, I claimed to have forgotten the medication at the resort. I told her that I and the kids would take a different taxi home to let me rest. Jason took a separate taxi to his parents' house. As soon as I arrived home, I downloaded the footage from 2 days before our vacation onto a portable hard drive. These were the days when Jason had visited our home. It took some time to complete the download, but it finished before my wife returned. I closely observed her to see if she checked the camera's storage or did anything to tamper with it, but she acted as though the cameras didn't exist in her world. It took us until midnight to finish unpacking. All I could think about was getting everyone to bed so I could examine the footage. When everyone finally went to sleep, I connected the hard drive to my laptop and began the daunting task of reviewing the recordings. I fast-forwarded to the specific timeline of Jason's visit. On the night he arrived, he stayed in the guest bedroom, accessible through a hallway from the game room. As I fast-forwarded through the footage, I spotted my wife on the game room camera. I hit play at normal speed, and the timestamp read 0:53 a.m. My wife met Jason in the hallway, visible to the game room camera. He pulled her in for a kiss, and they passionately made out for a brief moment. Playfully, she pushed him away and turned to leave the game room. As she did, he playfully slapped her on the bum, and she giggled her way out towards the main area. Even to a blind man, it was glaringly obvious they were having an affair. That was all the proof I needed. My heart raced so fast I thought I might have a heart attack. I wasn't angry, but I felt relieved that I finally had the evidence to confront my unfaithful wife. Just as I was about to close my laptop, she appeared on the footage again around 1:15 a.m. She went directly to the guest hallway, presumably heading to the guest bedroom where Jason was staying. She didn't emerge until 2:47 a.m. Since my son's girlfriend was staying in the guest room, Jason was the only person there. It was clear she had joined him in the guest bedroom for a private encounter. Afterward, she walked off towards the main area and then to our matrimonial bed where I was sleeping. Armed with the evidence I needed, I didn't wake her up the next morning. I contacted my lawyer, who referred me to a divorce attorney. I scheduled a meeting on the same day, and after the discussion, I had a better understanding of the significant financial impact this divorce would have on me. Despite the financial implications, I knew I had to follow through with a separation agreement. I couldn't continue a marriage with someone I couldn't trust, who had lied to me and shifted blame onto me, even accusing me of prejudice while taking advantage of a young man she was supposed to be mentoring. I realized I wouldn't want my kids to know the details of the divorce to avoid turning them against their mother. However, I had no desire for Jason to remain a part of our lives. Although I recognized the circumstances and that he might not have initiated the affair, I didn't want a constant reminder of my wife's infidelity. Whether I'd ever reveal this to my son and daughters, or if I wanted them to know, remained uncertain. Nonetheless, I intended to use it as a negotiating point in dealing with my wife. That evening, with my kids out of the house, I edited the video to include only the part where my wife and Jason were making out, and her visit to the guest bedroom from 1:15 a.m. to 2:47 a.m. I called her into the room and played it on my laptop. Just a few minutes into it, she realized what it was and covered her face with her hands. She refused to look at the screen or answer any of my questions. I wanted to know details about their relationship, like when it began, but she wouldn't provide any answers. All she did was sob, fully aware there was no excuse. I took that opportunity to give her a taste of what she had put me through during our trip. I called her various names, and the only time I got a reaction from her was when I mentioned sharing the video with our kids. She immediately stopped sobbing, looked at me, and began begging on her knees. She promised to do anything I asked to prevent me from revealing it to our children. I laid out my terms. She would accept any alimony I decided to pay, and we would proceed with an amicable divorce based on my conditions. In return, I agreed to go along with the story that our divorce was due to irreconcilable differences. The following day, we gathered our children and broke the news about our divorce. My wife and our 3 kids were present. The kids had numerous questions and made every effort to encourage us to reconcile. However, my wayward wife played her part, maintaining the story that both of us had been unhappy for a while and separation was the best option. It was a very emotional night. My wife tried her best to suppress her emotions so the kids would think she initiated the divorce, but it was clear that I was the one filing for it. No matter how hard we tried to hide it, she couldn't hold back her feelings, making it a profoundly sad day for our family. I tried to keep myself composed, but found myself shedding tears when I was alone in the bedroom. Well, that's the way it is. Another failed marriage for the same reason. I can't help but wonder why I keep getting married. Update: so, after we told our children about our separation, my kids understandably struggled with the news. My youngest, who is now 16, took it the hardest. She couldn't understand why we couldn't reconcile. The following day, my oldest daughter came to talk to me in the room that my wife and I used to share. My wife now sleeps in the guest room. My daughter told me that she had tried to reach her mother, knocking on her door, but she hadn't been getting any response. She was confused about when and how things had gone wrong because just a few days ago, we all seemed happy during the vacation trip. She sat next to me on the bed, trying to get me to reveal the reason for the divorce. Her continuous crying almost led me to slip up as she put a lot of pressure on me. She mentioned that we had shut them out of our lives, and that bothered me because I didn't think we had. But I reassured her that her mother would let her know when things had calmed down. I explained that her mother and I had a great marriage and had raised 3 beautiful kids, for which I was grateful. However, there comes a time when people fall out of love, and that's what happened. I gave her a somewhat vague answer, and she was smart enough to sense that. She might have left the room, suspecting infidelity on my wife's part, but didn't want to push me too far, perhaps fearing what she might discover. Since she's close to her mom, I figured she'd find out the truth soon enough. The following day, I had an appointment with my otolaryngologist for a hearing aid that significantly improved my hearing. My wife remained secluded in her room for a couple of days. We typically eat dinner together, but my children took their food to their rooms, and I didn't see my wife all day. I was the only one at the dining table. My oldest daughter is an excellent cook, so she usually prepares meals for the family when she's back from college. She's a really great kid, and I couldn't be prouder of her. We used to be a normal, traditional American family. We'd eat dinner together, exchange kisses and I love yous, go to church as a family. It felt really strange to see my kids not having dinner together, and our family falling apart like this. I had spent years building this family to what it was, and my wife had just torn it apart because of an affair. As I sat alone at the dining table, I felt anger towards my wife, but I also questioned whether I was doing the right thing. I mean, I wasn't unhappy with the marriage before D-Day, and it's not like I wasn't getting enough closeness from my wife. I've heard stories of wives cheating and denying their husbands closeness during their affairs, but that wasn't the case for me. In my situation, my wife never denied me intimacy or affection throughout our marriage. She treated me incredibly well, and I always felt like I was her top priority, even before our children. Deep down, I felt jealous and betrayed. I questioned if her affair with Jason was driven by an insatiable desire she needed to satisfy. Maybe Jason was the easiest option for her because he was readily available. I wish it had been someone outside our close circle. It wouldn't have made it any easier, but it wouldn't have been someone my son considers his best friend and who's so close to our family. The next day, my son's girlfriend left, and I had a chance to talk to my son. Although we didn't delve into many details, he didn't ask why we were separating. He just wanted to know how I was coping. I knew he had been talking to my daughter based on the way he asked his questions. About a day later, my wife finally emerged from her sorrow. She looked like she had been crying a lot, with swollen eyes, unkempt hair, and appearing as though she hadn't showered for days. That evening, both of us ate the dinner my daughter had prepared, but we sat at opposite ends of the dining table. I felt like I should be the one who's hurt and crying with swollen eyes, while my wife should be the one on her knees begging for forgiveness. Instead, I felt alone, carrying the heavy burden of not being able to tell my kids about her affair. My kids seemed more concerned about my wife's well-being because she appeared to be taking it really hard. Normally, she's the life of the party, always cheerful, making everyone feel welcome and cared for. She's very nurturing and caring. Don't get me wrong, I'm deeply hurt by this, but I've become skilled at hiding it and pretending that everything is okay. The following day, my wife asked if we could go to a restaurant we both like to talk. I didn't really want to because I was still hurt by her affair, but considering the tension between us and the kids, I felt like we needed to break the ice. If we were going to separate, which was the plan, it should be done amicably. We shared the same car and didn't engage in much conversation during the ride. Upon our arrival, and as we took our seats, she immediately began by expressing her apologies. She acknowledged that she was sorry for all the pain she had caused me and for betraying my trust. She mentioned that she had been so embarrassed and ashamed that she didn't want to leave our room. She admitted to being selfish, driven by instinct, without considering the consequences for those she loves. She emphasized her deep love for me and her desire to spend the rest of her life with me. She revealed that she hadn't truly comprehended the extent of the pain she had inflicted until she was discovered. I allowed her to finish her apology before responding. I pointed out that her remorse seemed to stem from being caught, and I felt that we had a responsibility to be honest with our children. As soon as I mentioned this, her expression shifted to one of distress. She lowered her head, holding it with both hands as if she had a headache. After raising her head, she looked at me with tears in her eyes and began fanning herself as if she were hyperventilating. I remained stoic and didn't react to her dramatic response. She fell silent for a moment and then admitted that she understood she would eventually have to tell them the truth, but needed time to gather the courage. She inquired about ways to save our relationship. she suggested the idea of allowing an open marriage on my part while she remained faithful. She begged me not to pressure her to tell the children the truth and suggested that we keep it between us. I insisted that she had to tell the children the truth. I asked her how long the affair had been going on. She claimed that the affair had been going on for 6 years. Mind you, Jason must have been in high school then. I pressed her for more details, and she explained that the first occurrence happened accidentally. It was during our youngest daughter's basketball game. She was supposed to watch our daughter's first basketball game with our son, who had invited Jason to join them. The game was scheduled for around 5 p.m., but there was a delay, so our daughter was practicing with her team while our son either watched or played on his phone she couldn't recall. Jason was sitting between her and our son, and she engaged in a conversation with him. She mentioned needing some fresh air, and Jason accompanied her. They eventually found themselves in her minivan, and one thing led to another, resulting in a kiss and intimacy in the back of her minivan in the high school parking lot. She admitted feeling guilty and cheap about it, and they promised not to repeat it or disclose it to anyone. However, over the years, they continued their close encounters. Before our vacation, she hadn't seen him for over 6 months. She claimed she hadn't thought about it until Jason showed up to join us on vacation. I sensed she wasn't disclosing the whole story. I knew Jason hadn't invited himself, she had convinced him to come. I confronted her with this fact before she admitted to it. She wanted an opportunity to meet up with him again, and she had always desired to go on vacation with him, thinking this was her chance. She confessed they had been close the day before our vacation, caught by security cameras, and they were also intimate during the vacation when I discovered them. She explained that she cares about him and can't resist being physically close to him when they're together, but her love for me remains strong. She emphasized that the relationship with him was purely physical, perhaps trying to make me feel better about it. She mentioned that as she's gotten older, her desire for intimacy has increased significantly. According to her, a reduced intimacy left her constantly unsatisfied and frustrated since I no longer desired it as much as she did. She professed her deep love for me, but admitted to experiencing sexual frustration for a long time. To cope, she turned to Jason to fill the gap, and it reached a point where she couldn't control her desires, ultimately normalizing the affair. She revealed that she had sought help from a psychotherapist and was prescribed antidepressants used to treat conditions like depression, anxiety, or obsessive-compulsive disorder, which can help with compulsive sexual behaviors. However, she stopped taking the medication due to concerns about side effects. She claimed that psychotherapy and using certain adult toys had provided some relief, but the affair with Jason persisted. She maintained that he was the only person she had been unfaithful with, and the treatment and adult toys had helped her manage her urges. As she shared all this information, which she had never disclosed to me before, I felt bewildered and guilty. I wondered if knowing earlier might have led me to seek male enhancement medication to match her desires. When I asked her why she hadn't told me all this before, she said she had mentioned it several times, albeit not in great detail, dropping hints along the way. She felt that I had already withdrawn from our intimacy. She pointed out that I was only interested in intimacy 1 to 2 times a week, while she craved it at least once a day. She mentioned the times I had denied her intimacy, and how she had often been the one initiating it. She clarified that she wasn't trying to blame me, acknowledging that her sexual desire was the one that deviated from the norm. She wanted to work on herself because she recognized that I was already going through a lot. After our conversation at the restaurant, my anger had somewhat subsided. I had a sense of my wife's silent struggles, realizing she might have a borderline obsession with intimacy and had been trying to manage her desires. Although I had always known about this, I hadn't taken it seriously because she hadn't always been this way. She wasn't being dishonest when she claimed to have tried to communicate her needs to me, but I had dismissed her concerns, thinking it was just a passing phase. I even knew she had some toys, but I hadn't cared much since I was getting intimacy when I wanted it. I recognized that my mindset was somewhat selfish, and I should have paid more attention to her desires. I felt that she might be dealing with some form of illness and had been struggling with it. It was somewhat relieving to understand her perspective, but regardless of her state of mind, what she had done was wrong. She had broken our marriage vows, and I believe there should be consequences. However, at this point, I began to question my decision to divorce my unfaithful wife. Feeling the need to talk to someone, I scheduled an appointment with my therapist. He recommended that, considering the closeness of her relationship with her affair partner, she should cut off contact with Jason. I asked if he thought it was necessary to tell my children, but he explained that he couldn't assess the mental state of my wife and my children. He also mentioned that it might not matter much because Jason might inform my children himself. Nonetheless, what mattered most was that I control the narrative. He had no strong opinion on that, but suggested that if I chose not to inform my children, I should instruct my wife to tell Jason that their affair had been exposed and to never contact her or any of my family members again. He recommended considering a 2 to 3 month probation period to see if my feelings about divorce remained the same. He also suggested individual counseling for both of us, and, when asked about couples counseling, noted that it could be beneficial for her to express herself in front of an impartial observer. After the therapy session, I was uncertain about how I felt regarding the whole situation. However, as I contemplated the well-being of my children, the long-standing relationship I had built with my wife, and the happiness we had shared as a family, I concluded that it wouldn't hurt to give the 2 to 3 month probation a chance. That night, I discussed the conditions with my wife. I conveyed that she needed to cut off all contact with Jason and never communicate or meet with him again. I also informed her that we would disclose the affair to my son and my oldest daughter, who would then also cease contact with Jason. I made it clear that if she violated these terms, I would proceed with the divorce process that I had already initiated. She acknowledged her mistake and expressed her willingness to do whatever it took to salvage our marriage. Recognizing that the truth would eventually surface, she feared how our children would perceive her but agreed not to divulge explicit details and to accept the consequences. Following the discussion with my wife at the restaurant, tension in our household began to subside gradually. My children were curious and uncertain about whether we were still going through with the divorce, but they hadn't asked me directly. At this point, my kids started having dinner together as a family again, and things were slowly returning to normal in the household, although my wife and I were still sleeping in separate bedrooms. After the conversation with my wife regarding revealing her affair to my son and daughter, we decided to address it that night. After dinner, we sent our youngest daughter to her room and gathered my son and oldest daughter at the dining table. I began by explaining to my kids that their mother was the reason behind my initial desire for a divorce, but we were presently working towards reconciliation. To achieve this, she needed to confess her actions. Then it was my wife's turn to speak. It took her a while to find her words, and tears streamed down her face as my children watched in curiosity. Whether her emotions were genuine or a performance, it was painful to witness. Perhaps she was attempting to soften the impact by evoking sympathy, that's what I thought. She began by expressing her disappointment in herself and how she had embarrassed herself and made a huge mistake by engaging in an inappropriate relationship with Jason. The room fell silent as I glanced at my children to gauge their reactions. She kept her head down in shame, avoiding eye contact with my kids and me. As soon as she admitted this, my daughter's jaw dropped, and my son erupted in a fit of angry expletives. He abruptly stood up and stormed off to his bedroom, slamming the door behind him. Now, I sat across the dining table, my daughter positioned 2 chairs away to my right, and my wife sat on the opposite side. My daughter wore a shocked expression for at least a minute before she loudly whispered, "I knew it, I knew it." I remained in my seat, observing the unfolding drama, my emotions mixed and uncertain about how to interpret the situation. My daughter approached me, offering a hug, and even though I didn't respond, she clung to me tightly. Meanwhile, my wife was openly sobbing, and I suspected my daughter was shedding tears as well. Witnessing my wife's profound anguish, I felt genuine concern for her. I'd never seen her so distraught. Eventually, my wife got up and left the room, retreating to the guest room and shutting the door behind her. My daughter asked if I was okay, and I assured her that I was. I explained that I had had sufficient time to process the information, and while I hadn't forgiven her mother, I did understand why it had happened. I also conveyed that I didn't want to keep them in the dark any longer, which was why I had pushed her to reveal the truth. That night, I went to bed with a clear conscience, knowing that tomorrow was a new beginning and it was better to start with honesty rather than continue with lies. The following day, my daughter prepared breakfast for me. My wife remained in her room, and my son had already left the house. My daughter informed me that he was still upset and planning to move out to get away from his mother because he couldn't bear to be around her. During most of the morning, I conversed with my daughters, especially my oldest one, who tried to divert my thoughts from my wife's infidelity and infuse some positivity. By the afternoon, my wife still hadn't emerged from her room, which concerned my daughter because they had plans to run errands and were running late. She knocked on the door for what felt like over 10 minutes, but my wife didn't respond. As the evening approached and my wife still hadn't emerged from her room, worry began to creep in. I decided to knock on the door myself, but she didn't answer. I had believed that things were improving, but it appeared my wife wasn't handling the situation well. Initially, I thought she might be too ashamed to face my kids, but the situation felt increasingly peculiar. During dinner that night, she didn't join us, and my son hadn't returned home either. I called him to check on him, and he informed me he was at a friend's place. So it was just me and my 2 daughters having dinner that night. When I didn't receive any word from my wife the next morning, I sensed that something was amiss. I decided to force the door open with my oldest daughter's help, but it was bolted from the inside. As we managed to open the door, we discovered my wife lying face down under the covers. I also noticed some pills and a glass of water nearby. Immediately, I instructed my daughter to call. I checked for her pulse, but her body had already started to change color. My younger daughter started crying and shook my wife, trying to wake her up, while my older daughter was on the phone with the emergency services, becoming increasingly distressed. It didn't require a medical professional to see that she had passed away nearly a day ago. I felt completely numb, torn between crying and shouting, overwhelmed by shock and guilt, convinced that this was all my fault. It took me a while to regain my composure. The ambulance had already arrived and was preparing to place her in a body bag. I'm not sure who contacted my son, but he had already arrived and was sobbing uncontrollably. I spent almost the entire night speaking with the investigators.